The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead at Sunshine Storage as Maya clutched her swollen belly, watching the auctioneer point to Unit 47 billions. She had $12 left to her name and nowhere to sleep tonight. This rusted metal door was her last shot at survival. Sold to the lady in the front. Maya's heart pounded as she stepped into the cramped space filled with moldy boxes and forgotten furniture. She needed to find something, anything, worth more than the $10 she'd just spent. But when she pried open a leather suitcase hidden beneath a tarp, her blood ran cold. Inside weren't the vintage clothes or antiques she'd hoped for. Instead, she found newspaper clippings about a missing heiress from 1987, a collection of fake IDs, and a safety deposit box key taped to a handwritten confession. The confession detailed a murder that sent an innocent man to prison for life, a man who happened to be Maya's father. Someone had framed her dad and stolen a fortune, but now Maya held the proof. The question was, would revealing the truth set her father free, or would the real killer silence her forever? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Maya's hands trembled as she held the yellowed confession letter, her father's name jumping off the page like a physical blow. Robert Chen, convicted of murdering Helena Whitmore, the 23-year-old socialite whose disappearance had captivated the nation 35 years ago. Maya had been only 3 when the verdict came down, too young to understand why Daddy suddenly disappeared from her life forever. The handwriting was shaky but legible. "I can't live with what I've done." Helena Whitmore never made it out of the warehouse that night. But it wasn't Robert Chen who killed her. I framed him because I needed a fall guy. The real killer was... The sentence ended abruptly, as if the writer had been interrupted, or had second thoughts. Maya sank onto a dusty ottoman, the baby kicking restlessly against her ribs. She'd grown up believing her father was a monster just like everyone else did. Her mother had changed their last name and moved them across the country to escape the shame. Maya had spent her entire life running from his shadow, and now she was homeless, pregnant, and desperate enough to gamble her last $10 on a storage unit full of junk. Except it wasn't junk. She rifled through the newspaper clippings with growing excitement and terror. The headlines screamed of the Whitmore family's anguish, their substantial reward for information, the eventual arrest of the suspicious maintenance worker who had been near Helena's last known location. That maintenance worker was her father. But these clippings had been carefully annotated in the same handwriting as the confession. Notes in the margins pointed out inconsistencies in the police timeline, witness statements that didn't match, evidence that had mysteriously disappeared. Someone had been tracking the case obsessively, documenting every flaw in the prosecution's narrative. The fake IDs were even more disturbing. At least 6 different identities, all with the same man's photo but different names, different states, different backgrounds. The face was unremarkable, middle-aged, balding, the kind of person who could disappear into any crowd, but his eyes held a coldness that made Maya's skin crawl. She examined the safety deposit box key more closely. It was brass, worn smooth from handling, with the number 847 engraved on one side and First National Bank of Sacramento on the other. Whatever was in that box, someone had thought it important enough to hide for decades. The baby gave another sharp kick, reminding Maya of her immediate predicament. She was 36 weeks pregnant, had been evicted from her apartment 3 days ago, and had been sleeping in her car until it was repossessed yesterday morning. She'd walked 4 miles to this auction, drawn by a desperate plan to buy something cheap and flip it for enough money to eat. Instead, she'd stumbled into evidence that could exonerate her father. Maya carefully gathered the documents, her mind racing. If she took this to the police, would they believe her? Or would they assume she was just another desperate woman trying to free her guilty father with fabricated evidence? The confession wasn't signed, and without knowing who wrote it, proving its authenticity would be nearly impossible. But that safety deposit box key, that was real. That was tangible proof. A shadow fell across the storage unit entrance. Maya looked up to see a man in an expensive suit watching her, his face partially hidden by the afternoon sun streaming behind him. He was too far away for her to make out his features clearly, but something about his stillness, his focused attention, made her heart race. "Everything okay in there?" the storage facility manager called out, appearing beside the suited man. "You've got about 10 more minutes before we lock up for the night." The man in the suit melted away without a word, leaving Maya staring at an empty doorway and wondering if her discovery had just put her and her unborn child in mortal danger. The baby kicked hard against Maya's ribs as she stood outside storage unit 247, the keys trembling in her hand. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed and flickered, casting sickly shadows across the concrete floor. She'd blown her last $120 on this gamble, outbidding 2 other desperate souls who'd given up when the price climbed past what most people considered reasonable for a mystery box. The lock clicked open with surprising ease. Maya held her breath and rolled up the metal door. Dust motes danced in the weak afternoon light that filtered through the facility's dirty windows. The unit stretched back further than she'd expected, maybe 12 by 15 feet, packed floor to ceiling with furniture covered in yellowed sheets, cardboard boxes stacked like building blocks, and the musty smell of decades-old secrets. Her heart sank. This wasn't the jackpot she'd prayed for, no obvious antiques or electronics she could flip quickly, just the accumulated debris of someone's abandoned life. The baby shifted again, and Maya pressed her hand to her belly. "Come on, little one. Mama needs to find something good in here." She pulled out her phone's flashlight and stepped inside. The nearest box was labeled Kitchen, 1987, in faded blue ink. Inside, she found a set of Harvest Gold dishes that might fetch $20 at a yard sale. The next box held Christmas decorations that had seen better decades. An hour later, sweat beaded on her forehead despite the October chill. She'd found nothing but junk. Old clothes, paperback novels with cracked spines, a broken television that probably weighed more than she could lift. The pregnancy made everything harder. She had to stop every few minutes to catch her breath, and her back ached from bending over boxes. She was about to give up when she noticed something odd about the far wall. While the other 3 walls were lined with boxes and furniture, this one had a gap, a narrow space behind a tall dresser that seemed deliberately hidden. Maya squeezed into the gap, her growing belly making it a tight fit. Behind the dresser, pushed against the wall and covered by a canvas top, sat a small safe. Her pulse quickened. Safes meant valuables. Maybe jewelry, cash, important documents she could hold for ransom, though she immediately felt guilty for that last thought. The safe was old but solid, about the size of a microwave, with a combination lock that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Maya ran her fingers over the metal surface, wondering what secrets it might hold. She tried a few obvious combinations, 1234, 00000, 1111, but the lock didn't budge. Then she remembered the boxes labeled with dates from 1987. On impulse, she tried 8 to 7, 0 to 0. Nothing. She tried 1 to 9, 8 to 7. The lock clicked. Maya's hands shook as she pulled the heavy door open. Inside, manila folders were stacked neatly on metal shelves, along with what looked like photographs and a small wooden box. She pulled out the first folder and opened it under her phone's light. The papers inside made no immediate sense. Bank statements from accounts she'd never heard of, legal documents with official-looking seals, and carbon copies of letters typed on old-fashioned letterhead. But as she read more closely, certain words jumped out at her: wire transfer, Cayman Islands, money laundering investigation. The dates on everything ranged from 1985 to 1987. The amounts on the bank statements made her dizzy, millions of dollars moving between accounts with clinical precision. Maya pulled out the photographs next. Black and white, they showed men in expensive suits shaking hands, getting in and out of cars, entering buildings. Someone had written notes on the backs: JR plus Castellano, March 15th, delivery, Pier 47, meeting with Chicago contact. One name appeared repeatedly in the documents: Vincent Torino. Maya didn't recognize it, but something about the way it was written, always in careful block letters, sometimes circled or underlined, suggested it was important. The wooden box contained something that made Maya's blood run cold, a cassette tape labeled Fifth. Confession. March 23, 1987, insurance copy. She stared at the tape, her mind racing. This wasn't just someone's old junk. This was evidence. Evidence of what looked like a major financial crime from 35 years ago. Evidence that someone had hidden away in a storage unit and apparently forgotten about. Or evidence that someone had died before they could use it. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from her landlord. Rent was due yesterday. Pay by Friday or you're out. She looked down at the files in her hands, then at her swollen belly. Whatever this was, whatever Vincent Torino had confessed to on that tape, it was clearly worth hiding. And if it was worth hiding, it might be worth money. The question was, how much money? And more importantly, who else might know about it? The auction house parking lot emptied slowly, leaving behind only tire tracks in the gravel and the lingering scent of diesel exhaust. Maya sat in her Honda, hands trembling as she stared at the yellow receipt clutched between her fingers. Unit 47 billions, $325, nearly half of what remained in her checking account. The baby kicked, a sharp jab against her ribs that made her wince. 2008 weeks along, and already this little one seemed determined to make its presence known. Maya pressed her palm against the spot, feeling the flutter of movement beneath her skin. "What have I done?" she whispered to the empty car. The storage facility stretched before her like a maze of orange roll-up doors, each one hiding secrets or treasures, or, more likely, someone else's forgotten junk. Maya had never been to an auction before today, had never even considered it until desperation drove her to scroll through online listings at 3 in the morning, searching for any legal way to make money fast. She pulled up to Unit 47 billions and killed the engine. The facility was quieter now, most of the other auction winners having already claimed their prizes and departed. A few stragglers remained, loading furniture and boxes into pickup trucks with the methodical efficiency of experienced buyers. The unit's door was larger than she'd expected, about 10 feet wide. Maya fumbled with the bolt cutters she'd borrowed from her neighbor, her pregnant belly making it awkward to bend down to the padlock. The metal snapped with a satisfying crack, and she grabbed the door handle. The smell hit her first, musty cardboard, old fabric, and something else underneath, something metallic and stale. Maya covered her nose with her sleeve and reached for the light switch just inside the door. A single bare bulb flickered to life, casting harsh shadows across the contents. Her heart sank. The unit was packed floor to ceiling, but not with the kind of vintage furniture or collectibles she'd hoped to find. Instead, she saw towers of cardboard boxes, their corners soft with age and moisture. A few pieces of covered furniture lurked in the back, but most of the space was consumed by what looked like decades of accumulated paperwork. Maya stepped inside, her footsteps echoing in the enclosed space. The boxes nearest the door were labeled in faded black marker. Financial records 1987 to 1989, and tax documents 1990. She opened one at random and found herself staring at yellowed invoices and bank statements, all bearing the letterhead of something called Meridian Development Corporation. This was worthless. Who would buy old business records? Maya felt tears prick at her eyes as she moved deeper into the unit, past boxes labeled legal and contracts and personnel files. $325 down the drain. She was about to give up when she noticed something different about one of the covered pieces in the back corner. Unlike the other furniture, which was draped in old sheets or tarps, this item was wrapped in heavy black plastic and secured with duct tape. It was roughly the size of a filing cabinet, but something about the way it was hidden made Maya's pulse quicken. The tape was old and brittle, cracking away from the plastic as she pulled at it, Beneath the wrapping was indeed a filing cabinet, but this one was different from the others, newer, and locked with a combination lock that looked like it had been added recently. Maya tried the drawers anyway, but they wouldn't budge. She was about to move on when she noticed a small tear in the black plastic near the bottom of the cabinet. Through the gap she could see something that made her breath catch. Cash, stacks of it, rubber-banded together. Her hands shook as she widened the tear, and more bills became visible through the metal grating of the bottom drawer. Hundreds, maybe thousands of dollars, just sitting there in the dark. Maya glanced toward the unit's entrance, suddenly aware of how exposed she was. The parking lot beyond was nearly empty now, but she could hear voices from somewhere nearby, other auction winners going about their business. She quickly pulled a dusty tarp over the filing cabinet and stepped back. Her mind raced. Who keeps cash in a storage unit, and why wrap the whole cabinet in plastic like they were trying to hide it? The obvious answer made her stomach clench with equal parts excitement and fear. This wasn't just old business records. This was someone's secret. Maya looked around the unit with new eyes, noticing details she'd missed before. The way certain boxes were positioned to block the view of the back corner. The fact that most of the paperwork dated back to the late 80s and early 90s, but then stopped abruptly, like someone had disappeared. The baby kicked again, harder this time, and Maya made her decision. She would come back tonight with proper tools and explore more carefully. Whatever was in that filing cabinet might be exactly what she needed to change her life. She just hoped she wasn't about to change it in ways she couldn't control. Maya's hands trembled as she lifted the yellowed newspaper clipping from the shoebox. The headline screamed across decades, "Prominent businessman Richard Blackwood missing, police suspect foul play." The photograph beneath showed a distinguished man in his 50s with steel-grey hair and kind eyes. The date marked 32 years ago. She sank onto an overturned crate, her pregnant belly making the movement awkward. The storage unit suddenly felt smaller, the air thicker. Dust motes danced in the fluorescent light as she read the article with growing unease. Richard Blackwood, owner of Blackwood Industries, had vanished without a trace after leaving his office on a Tuesday evening in March 1991. His car was found abandoned at the marina, keys still in the ignition. "Jesus," Maya whispered, setting the clipping aside with shaking fingers. The next item in the box made her stomach lurch. A driver's license, expired decades ago, bore the same face from the newspaper. Richard Blackwood stared back at her through the plastic, his address listed as 1247 Millbrook Lane. She'd driven past that mansion countless times. It was now a historical landmark. Beneath the license lay something that made Maya's blood turn to ice. A Polaroid photograph, the colors faded but the image still clear. A man's body slumped in the driver's seat of a car, his head at an unnatural angle, the same kind eyes from the newspaper, now vacant and staring. Maya's hand flew to her mouth, bile rising in her throat. She scrambled backward, knocking over the shoebox. Contents scattered across the concrete floor, more photographs, documents, what looked like financial records. Her heart hammered against her ribs as the implications crashed over her. This wasn't just evidence of Richard Blackwood's disappearance. This was evidence of his murder. The baby kicked hard, as if sensing her distress. Maya pressed both hands to her belly, trying to calm her racing pulse. She needed to think clearly, but her mind reeled with possibilities and consequences. Who had rented this storage unit? Why keep evidence of a decades-old murder? And more importantly, why hadn't they come back for it? With trembling fingers, she gathered the scattered items. Another photograph showed the same car being pushed off what looked like a dock. Financial documents bore Blackwood's signature alongside another name she didn't recognize, Harold Morrison. Bank statements showed massive transfers in the weeks before Blackwood's disappearance. Maya's phone buzzed, making her jump. A text from the landlord, final notice. Pay by 6 p.m. or eviction proceedings begin tomorrow. The irony wasn't lost on her. Here she sat on evidence of a crime that had probably netted millions for someone, while she couldn't scrape together $800 for rent. The storage unit fee had seemed like her last hope, a desperate gamble that might yield something valuable to sell. Instead, she'd stumbled into something that could destroy her life. But as she stared at the documents, another thought crept in. The Blackwood case had never been solved. She remembered her grandmother talking about it years ago, how the man's widow had offered a massive reward for information leading to his killer's conviction. Maya's fingers fumbled for her phone, quickly searching for news about the case. The reward still stood, $5 million for information leading to the arrest and conviction of Richard Blackwood's murderer. $5 million. Maya's breath caught. That money could change everything, pay for the baby's future, secure a home, ensure they'd never go hungry. But it could also paint a target on her back. Whoever killed Blackwood might still be alive, might still be powerful enough to silence anyone who threatened their secret. She thought of the unit's previous owner, how they'd simply stopped paying the fees. Had they forgotten about this evidence, or had something happened to them? The thought sent chills down her spine. A car door slammed somewhere in the storage facility, echoing through the metal corridors. Maya froze, listening to footsteps on gravel. Probably just another customer, but paranoia crept up her spine like cold fingers. She quickly stuffed everything back into the shoebox, her movements urgent but careful not to damage anything. The footsteps passed her unit without stopping, but Maya's heart continued racing. She needed time to think, to research, to figure out her next move. Taking the evidence to the police seemed like the obvious choice, but what if the killer had connections there? What if she ended up like the storage unit's previous owner, simply vanishing? Maya tucked the shoebox under her arm and switched off the light. As darkness swallowed the unit, she made a decision that would change everything. She would hold on to the evidence, at least until she understood what she was dealing with. But first, she needed to find out who had rented this unit and why they'd abandoned such damning secrets. The baby kicked again, and Maya whispered, "Hold on, little one. Mama's going to figure this out." The rain drummed against the storage unit's metal roof as Maya crouched beside the open strongbox, her heart hammering against her ribs. The photograph in her trembling hands showed a young woman who could have been her sister, dark hair, olive skin, kind eyes that would never see another sunrise. But it was the newspaper clipping beneath it that made her blood run cold. "Senator's daughter missing." The headline screamed in bold letters from 23 years ago. Elena Morrison, 22, vanishes from campaign event. Maya's breath came in short gasps. Elena Morrison. She knew that name, everyone in the state did. The tragic disappearance had dominated headlines for months, eventually becoming one of those unsolved cases that people whispered about at dinner parties. Senator Richard Morrison had built his entire political career on the tragedy, becoming a crusader for victims' rights, winning election after election on a platform of justice and protection. But here, in this forgotten storage unit, lay evidence that Elena Morrison hadn't simply vanished. She'd been murdered. Maya rifled through the remaining contents with shaking fingers. More photographs, crime scene shots that had never seen a courtroom. Elena's body, partially buried in what looked like a construction site. Close-ups of evidence bags. And then, the one that made Maya's stomach lurch, a photo of hands washing blood from an expensive watch, the Morrison family crest clearly visible on its face. At the bottom of the box, wrapped in plastic, was a small digital recorder. Maya pressed play with trembling fingers. "This is Detective James Henley, badge number 4471. Today is October 15th, 1999. I'm recording this because I can't live with what we've done." The voice was gravelly, tired, weighted with guilt. The Morrison girl didn't run away. She was killed by her father's campaign manager, David Rothschild, when she threatened to expose the kickbacks. We know this. We have the evidence. But the order came down from the top. This investigation dies here. Maya's hand flew to her mouth. The recording continued. "Senator Morrison knows. He's been covering for Rothschild because they're both neck-deep in the construction contracts. 20 million in federal funds, all of it dirty. They buried Elena with the evidence, literally. The construction site where we found her. It's going to be the new Morrison Memorial Hospital. They're going to bury their crime under a monument to their fake grief." The recording crackled, and Maya could hear papers shuffling. "I'm keeping copies of everything. Photos, financial records, witness statements we were told to lose. If something happens to me, if this gets out somehow, people need to know the truth. Elena Morrison deserves justice, and her killer is walking free because her own father values power more than his daughter's life." The recording ended with a click that seemed to echo in the silent storage unit. Maya sat back on her heels, mind reeling. She pulled out her phone and searched for Detective James Henley. The obituary was dated 3 months after the recording. Died in a single car accident on Highway 12. Another search revealed that David Rothschild had died of a heart attack 5 years ago, but not before becoming one of the most powerful lobbyists in the state. And Senator Morrison? He was now Governor Morrison, running for president on a platform of moral leadership and justice reform. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from Danny. "How's the treasure hunting? Find anything good?" She stared at the message, then at the evidence spread around her. This wasn't just anything good, this was dynamite. The kind of revelation that toppled governments and made careers, the kind of secret that people killed for. Her first instinct was to call the police, but Henley's recording echoed in her mind. How deep did the corruption go? Who could she trust? Morrison had been in power for over 2 decades, accumulating allies and debts throughout the system. But then she thought of her ultrasound appointment next week, of the bills piling up, of Danny working double shifts just to keep them afloat. This evidence was worth millions, not just in terms of justice, but in very literal terms. A presidential candidate's career-ending scandal, media outlets would pay handsomely for authenticated proof. Maya's hands moved to her belly, feeling the slight swell where her child grew. What kind of world was she bringing this baby into? One where killers became governors, where justice died in storage units. She carefully repacked the evidence, her mind racing through possibilities. She could go to the FBI, but what if Morrison's influence reached there too? She could go to the media, but would they believe her? Would they protect her? As she lifted the strongbox, something else caught her eye. A business card tucked into the corner. Sarah Chen, investigative journalist, it read, with a phone number written in faded ink on the back. Maya pocketed the card and locked the storage unit behind her. Walking to her car through the rain, she felt the weight of 23 years of buried secrets pressing down on her shoulders. Elena Morrison had been silenced, but her voice was about to rise from the grave. The manila envelope felt heavier than it should have, as Maya clutched it against her chest, her heart hammering so hard she worried it might hurt the baby. Back in her apartment, she'd spread the contents across her kitchen table like pieces of a deadly puzzle, each document more damning than the last. Bank statements showed regular deposits of $50,000 into an account belonging to Richard Blackwood, deposits that corresponded exactly with the dates circled in red on Eleanor's calendar. Wire transfers from overseas accounts, with names she didn't recognize, all flowing through a complex web of shell companies. But it was the handwritten ledger that made her blood run cold. Names, dozens of them, with dollar amounts beside each entry. Some she recognized from newspaper headlines over the years, politicians who'd died in suspicious accidents, whistleblowers who'd vanished, journalists who'd stopped asking inconvenient questions. Next to each name was a date and a payment amount, all in Eleanor's precise handwriting. Maya's hands trembled as she turned the pages. Eleanor Whitmore hadn't just been documenting a crime. She'd been running a murder-for-hire operation that spanned decades. The baby kicked, sharp and sudden, making Maya gasp. She pressed her hand to her belly, trying to steady her breathing. What had she stumbled into? And more importantly, how many people would kill to keep this secret buried? Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Stop digging, Maya, for your sake and your baby's. The message appeared and disappeared so quickly she almost thought she'd imagined it. But the chill that ran down her spine was real enough. Someone knew. Someone was watching. Maya gathered the documents with shaking hands, shoving them back into the envelope. She needed to think, needed to figure out her next move. The smart thing would be to destroy everything and pretend she'd never opened that storage unit. But smart wouldn't pay for the baby's medical bills or keep her from losing the apartment. She thought about Detective Morrison's card, still sitting on her nightstand. But what if he was compromised too? Eleanor's client list included powerful people, judges, senators, business moguls. Anyone could be involved. Another kick from the baby, this one accompanied by a sharp pain that made her double over. She'd been so focused on the documents that she'd forgotten to eat again. The stress couldn't be good for either of them. Maya forced herself to make a sandwich, her mind racing as she chewed mechanically. There had to be someone she could trust, someone who could help her navigate this nightmare. She thought of her sister Claire in Portland, but involving family felt too dangerous. Her lawyer was a joke, a public defender who barely remembered her name. Then she remembered the business card tucked behind Eleanor's photographs. James Kellerman, private investigator. If Eleanor had kept his card, maybe she'd been planning to expose the operation herself. Maybe Kellerman was one of the good guys. Or maybe he was another threat. The apartment felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing in. Maya walked to the window and peered through the blinds at the street below. A black sedan sat at the corner, engine running. It hadn't been there an hour ago. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was Detective Morrison. "Found something interesting about your storage unit. Can we meet?" Maya stared at the message, paralyzed by indecision. Morrison seemed genuine, but Eleanor's ledger had taught her that appearances meant nothing. Still, she needed allies, and a detective might be her best option. She texted back, "Coffee shop on Pine Street, 1 hour." Then she grabbed her jacket and the envelope, but paused at the door. The smart move would be to leave the documents hidden here, bring copies instead. But smart might also mean having the originals as insurance. Maya tucked the envelope inside her jacket and headed for the back exit. If someone was watching the front, maybe they hadn't thought to cover the alley. The late afternoon air was crisp, carrying the scent of rain. Maya kept to side streets, checking over her shoulder every few blocks. The black sedan was nowhere to be seen, but that didn't mean she wasn't being followed. The coffee shop was busy enough to provide cover, but small enough that she could spot trouble coming. Maya chose a table near the back exit and ordered chamomile tea, trying to look casual while scanning the other customers. Morrison arrived exactly on time, looking tired and worried. He slid into the seat across from her, his eyes immediately going to the envelope beside her cup. "You found something," he said. It wasn't a question. Maya nodded slowly. "Detective Morrison, if I show you this, there's no going back. For either of us." He leaned forward, his expression grim. "Maya, I've been investigating Eleanor Whitmore for 3 years. Whatever you found, I think I'm ready for it." Maya's hand hovered over the envelope, knowing that opening it would change everything. The photographs scattered across Maya's kitchen table like accusations, each black and white image a window into a nightmare she couldn't fully comprehend. Her hands trembled as she picked up the magnifying glass she'd borrowed from her neighbor, studying the faces in the images with growing unease. Detective Sarah Chen's business card sat beside her laptop, the edges already worn from Maya's nervous handling. She'd found the card online after searching for Chen's name. Apparently, the detective had been involved in several high-profile missing persons cases over the years. But calling her felt like stepping off a cliff with no idea what lay below. The baby kicked, a sharp jab against her ribs that made her gasp. "I know, little one," she whispered, placing a protective hand over her belly. "Mama's scared too." She turned back to the laptop screen where she'd been cross-referencing the newspaper clippings with online archives. The Henderson Construction Company had been a major player in Chicago's development boom of the 1980s and 90s. Robert Henderson himself had been something of a local celebrity. Photos showed him cutting ribbons at building dedications, shaking hands with mayors and aldermen, his smile wide and confident. But the smile looked different now, knowing what she knew, predatory, calculating. A soft knock at her door made her freeze. Maya quickly gathered the photographs, shoving them into the manila envelope, her heart hammering against her chest. The knock came again, more insistent. "Maya? It's Diane from next door." Relief flooded through her as she recognized her elderly neighbor's voice. Maya opened the door to find Diane holding a covered dish, her weathered face creased with concern. "I made too much casserole again," Diane said, though her sharp eyes were already scanning Maya's face. "You look terrible, dear. Are you eating enough?" "I'm fine, really." Maya accepted the dish, the warmth seeping through the ceramic into her palms. "Thank you for this, and for lending me the magnifying glass. Find what you were looking for?" Diane's question seemed casual, but Maya caught the underlying curiosity. "Just some old family photos. Nothing important." Diane's expression suggested she didn't believe that for a second, but she didn't push. "Well, if you need anything at all, you know where to find me." After Diane left, Maya returned to her research, but concentration proved elusive. Every creak of the building, every footstep in the hallway outside made her look up nervously. She was being paranoid, she told herself. No one knew what she'd found. No one was watching her. The rational part of her mind knew she should turn everything over to the police immediately. But the desperate part, the part that counted every dollar in her meager bank account, that felt the weight of impending motherhood like a physical burden, whispered about the safety deposit box key. What if there really was something valuable in that box? Something that could change her life, give her baby the future they deserved? The storage unit alone had been worth the auction price just for the furniture and electronics. What if this was the universe finally throwing her a lifeline? But as she stared at the photographs again, at the faces of young women who'd been someone's daughters, someone's sisters, the guilt felt like acid in her stomach. These weren't just cold case files or abstract news stories. These were real people whose lives had been stolen, whose families had spent decades wondering what happened to them. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Hey, haven't heard from you since the auction. Everything okay?" Maya stared at the message, her thumb hovering over the keyboard. Marcus had been nothing but kind to her, even giving her his business about the storage unit for free. He deserved to know what they'd stumbled into, but involving him would put him at risk too, and she couldn't bear that responsibility. She typed back, "All good. Just tired. Pregnancy, you know." His response came quickly. "Take care of yourself. Call if you need anything." The kindness in those simple words nearly broke her resolve. She was so tired of being alone with her fears, her uncertainty, but this burden was hers to bear. As evening shadows lengthened across her apartment, Maya made her decision. She would call Detective Chen in the morning, tell her everything, but first she would visit the bank, just to see what was in that safety deposit box, just to know what she was giving up. She locked the envelope in her bedroom dresser, buried beneath sweaters she'd probably never wear again. Tomorrow would bring answers, one way or another. Tonight, she would try to sleep and pretend that mysterious cars weren't driving slowly past her building, that shadows in the parking lot were just tricks of the light. The baby kicked again, gentler this time, and Maya closed her eyes, making a silent promise. Whatever happened next, she would protect them both, even if it meant walking straight into the darkness that had already claimed too many lives. The photographs spread across Mia's kitchen table like evidence at a crime scene, which, she realized with a chill, they essentially were. Sarah Chen sat across from her, methodically examining each image with the practiced eye of someone accustomed to unraveling mysteries. The detective's presence in Mia's cramped apartment felt surreal, as if two worlds had collided, the desperate reality of unpaid bills and pregnancy fears with the shadowy realm of decades-old secrets. "Tell me again how you acquired these," Sarah said, not looking up from a photograph that showed Richard Ashford shaking hands with a man whose face was partially obscured by shadow. Mia's hands trembled as she poured herself another cup of tea. "Storage unit auction. Unit 247 at Secure Store. I bought it 3 days ago for $200. The words felt rehearsed now, but no less frightening for their repetition. Sarah nodded, making notes in a small pad. "And you've had no contact with anyone regarding these photographs? No unusual calls, visitors, anything out of the ordinary?" The question hit too close to home. Mia thought about the black sedan she'd noticed parked outside her building that morning, the same one she'd glimpsed yesterday evening. She'd convinced herself it was paranoia, pregnancy hormones making her jumpy. But now, watching Sarah's serious expression, those fears crystallized into something more tangible. There was a car, Mia admitted reluctantly. I've seen it twice. Black sedan, tinted windows. Sarah's pen stopped moving. When? Yesterday evening when I got home from work, and again this morning. It could be nothing. In my experience, coincidences are rarely just coincidences. Sarah gathered several photographs, focusing on ones that clearly showed Ashford's face. These were taken over what appears to be several months, possibly years. Someone was conducting surveillance. Mia studied the detective's face, searching for clues about what Sarah was thinking. You know something about this, don't you? About Ashford? Sarah was quiet for a long moment, weighing her words. Richard Ashford died in 1987. Officially, it was ruled a suicide. He jumped from his office building downtown, 23rd floor, but there were always questions. What kind of questions? The kind that get buried when powerful people want them buried. Sarah picked up another photograph, this one showing Ashford entering what looked like a warehouse. Ashford was connected to several development projects in the city. Big money, city contracts, the kind of deals that make or break political careers. Just before his death, there were rumors he was cooperating with a federal investigation into corruption. Mia felt the baby shift inside her, a flutter of movement that reminded her of everything she had to lose. And you think these photographs are connected to that? I think someone went to great lengths to document Ashford's activities, and someone else has spent 37 years believing that documentation was destroyed. Sarah met Mia's eyes. The question is, what are you planning to do with them? The weight of that question settled over Mia like a heavy blanket. She'd been so focused on the immediate need for money that she hadn't fully considered the implications of what she'd found. These weren't just valuable photographs, they were evidence that could potentially reopen cold cases, end careers, destroy lives. And someone had already killed to protect these secrets once. I need the money, Mia said quietly. My baby, I can't even afford proper prenatal care. I thought maybe I could sell them to a newspaper or... Sarah's voice was sharp. Listen to me carefully. If these photographs are what I think they are, approaching the wrong person could get you killed. The kind of people involved in this don't hesitate when it comes to protecting themselves. Fear crawled up Mia's spine. Then what am I supposed to do? Just pretend I never found them? You're supposed to let me help you. Sarah leaned forward. I've been a detective for 15 years. I've seen what happens to civilians who stumble into situations like this, but I've also seen justice served when evidence like this surfaces through proper channels. Outside, a car door slammed. Both women froze, listening. Footsteps echoed in the hallway, growing closer. Mia held her breath as the footsteps passed her door and continued down the hall. A neighbor, nothing more. But the moment of fear was enough to drive home Sarah's warning. There's something else, Sarah said, her voice lower now. The storage unit where you found these. Secure Store has been owned by the same family for 40 years, the Kowalskis. They were questioned in connection with the original investigation into Ashford's death. Mia's blood ran cold. She'd walked blindly into something much larger and more dangerous than she'd imagined. The storage unit auction hadn't been random bad luck for someone who'd stopped paying their bills. It had been deliberate, planned. Someone wanted these photographs to surface, she whispered. Sarah nodded grimly. The question is why now, and what they expect you to do about it. The warehouse felt different in the early morning light, shadows stretching long fingers across the concrete floor as Maya approached Unit 47 with trembling hands. She'd barely slept, her mind churning with possibilities and dangers in equal measure. The key felt heavier than it should as she turned it in the lock. The metal door rolled up with a screech that seemed to echo her nerves. Everything looked exactly as she'd left it. The banker's box sitting innocuously on the dusty table, the manila envelope beside it like a sleeping serpent. But knowing what lay inside those documents had transformed the space into something almost sacred or cursed. Maya pulled out her phone and began photographing everything systematically. She'd decided during her sleepless night that copies were essential, insurance against whatever came next. Each click of the camera shutter felt like another step deeper into a maze she might never escape. The offshore account statements were damning enough, showing millions flowing through a web of shell companies, but it was the correspondence that made her blood run cold. Letters between Judge Morrison and someone identified only as M discussed not just money laundering but witness intimidation, evidence tampering, and worse. The Castellanos case wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern spanning decades. A car door slammed somewhere in the distance, and Maya froze. The warehouse was supposed to be nearly empty this early, most storage customers preferring afternoon visits. She listened intently, hearing nothing but her own rapid heartbeat and the distant hum of traffic. She returned to the documents, her phone's camera capturing page after page, bank routing numbers, dates, amounts that made her dizzy. Judge Morrison hadn't just been corrupt. He'd been the cornerstone of an entire criminal enterprise, and somewhere in the city, people who'd built fortunes on that corruption were still walking free. The sound of footsteps on concrete made her look up sharply. They were distant but deliberate, moving through the maze of storage units with purpose. Maya quickly gathered the most damning documents, stuffing them into her jacket. Her hands shook as she closed the banker's box, every second feeling like an eternity. The footsteps were closer now, accompanied by low voices. 2 people, maybe 3. Maya's pulse hammered as she realized she was trapped. The unit had only one exit, and whoever was coming would see her the moment they turned the corner. She looked around desperately. The unit was deep but narrow, filled with furniture and boxes that could provide minimal cover. Her best option was to hide behind a tall wardrobe near the back wall and hope they didn't search thoroughly. Moving as quietly as her pregnant body would allow, Maya squeezed behind the wardrobe just as the voices became clear. "Sure this is the right unit?" A man's voice, gravelly and impatient. 47. That's what she told Hendricks. A woman this time, crisp and professional. The real question is what she's already taken. Maya pressed herself against the cold metal wall, barely breathing. They knew. Somehow they knew she'd been here, knew she'd found something significant. The baby kicked, as if sensing her terror, and she placed a protective hand over her belly. "Looks like someone's been through everything," the man said, and Maya heard the scrape of boxes being moved. "Files are all out of order." "She's not stupid," the woman replied. "Probably copied everything. We need to find her before she decides to play hero." There was a long pause, filled only with the sound of papers being shuffled. Maya tried to calculate distances, exits, possibilities. The warehouse had multiple entrances, but reaching any of them meant crossing open ground where she'd be visible. 23 years Morrison's been dead, the man said, his voice carrying a note of frustration. Why couldn't his secret stay buried with him? Because he was paranoid and kept records of everything. Insurance policy, he called it. Never imagined some pregnant girl would stumble across his insurance and decide to cash it in. Maya's mind raced. They were talking about Judge Morrison's death as if they'd been involved, as if the heart attack that had ended his career and life hadn't been natural at all. The implications made her stomach turn. What about the girl, Sarah Castellanos? What about her? She's been in the wind for decades. Probably dead, honestly. Morrison made sure she couldn't surface without facing charges herself. The casual dismissal of a young woman's life, the cold calculation in their voices. Maya realized she wasn't just holding evidence of corruption, but possibly murder. And now she was next on their list. The voices began to fade as they moved away from the unit, but not before the woman spoke one last time. "Find Maya Rodriguez, tonight, whatever it takes." The footsteps receded, leaving Maya alone with the terrible knowledge that her name was known. Her time was running out, and the evidence she carried was both her only weapon and her death sentence. Maya's hands trembled as she stared at the photograph in the dim light of her apartment. The woman's face looked back at her, young, vibrant, with striking green eyes that seemed familiar yet impossible. She flipped the photo over again, reading the faded inscription, "Sarah, 1987. Our future starts now." The pregnancy test she'd taken that morning sat on the coffee table beside the scattered documents from the storage unit, two pink lines that confirmed what she'd suspected for weeks. The irony wasn't lost on her. Here she was, carrying new life, while surrounded by evidence of a life brutally taken. Her phone buzzed. Another text from an unknown number: "Stop digging or you'll join her." Maya's heart hammered against her ribs. She'd received 3 similar messages since visiting the library yesterday, each one more explicit than the last. Someone was watching her, tracking her movements, and they weren't playing games. She spread the bank statements across her kitchen table, squinting at the faded numbers. The accounts belonged to Millennium Construction, Richard Crane's company. Between 1987 and 1988, large sums had moved through various offshore accounts, payments to shell companies, transfers to untraceable accounts, and one recurring deposit that caught her attention: monthly payments of $50,000 to something called Phoenix Holdings. Maya grabbed her laptop and searched for Phoenix Holdings. Nothing came up in recent records, but she found archived business filings from the late 80s. The company had been registered in Nevada, listing only a P.O. box as an address. The sole officer, Sarah Chen. Jesus, Maya whispered. Sarah hadn't just been Crane's employee, she'd been his business partner, or his accomplice. The floorboards creaked above her apartment. Maya froze, listening. Mrs. Patterson from upstairs was in Florida visiting her daughter. The apartment should be empty. Another creak, deliberate and slow. Maya quickly gathered the documents, shoving them into a manila envelope. She needed to get out, find somewhere public and safe. As she reached for her keys, a sharp knock echoed through her apartment. "Maya Torres, police. We need to speak with you." Her relief was immediate. She rushed to the door, checking the peephole. 2 men in suits stood in the hallway, badges visible. Maya unlocked the door, keeping the chain latched. "What's this about?" The older detective, graying at the temples with tired eyes, held up his badge. "Detective Morrison, Metro PD. We understand you purchased a storage unit at Sunset Storage last week. Unit 47. Maya's mouth went dry. "Yes. Why?" "We're investigating some irregularities with that facility. May we come in?" Something felt wrong. Maya studied their faces through the gap. The younger detective kept glancing at his watch, and Morrison's badge looked slightly off. The font too modern, the seal too crisp. "Can I see some ID?" she asked. Morrison smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Of course." He reached into his jacket, and Maya glimpsed something that made her blood freeze, the edge of a gun holster. Maya slammed the door and threw the deadbolt. She heard Morrison curse, then urgent whispers. They weren't police. Real cops would have called for backup by now. Wouldn't have left when she closed the door. Her fire escape. Maya grabbed the envelope and her purse, rushing to the bedroom window. The old frame stuck, paint sealing it shut from years of neglect. Behind her she heard the front door explode inward. "She's running!" Morrison's voice carried through the apartment. Maya threw her shoulder against the window frame. It gave way with a screech of wood and metal. Cold November air rushed in as she climbed onto the fire escape. 3 stories down, the alley looked impossibly far. Footsteps pounded through her apartment. Maya descended as fast as she dared, the metal steps slick with frost. At the second-floor landing, she heard Morrison's voice from her bedroom window. There, moving down the fire escape. A sharp crack echoed through the alley. The brick wall beside Maya's head exploded in a shower of dust and fragments. They were shooting at her. Maya half fell down the last flight of stairs, hitting the alley pavement hard. Pain shot through her ankle, but adrenaline kept her moving. She limped toward the street, clutching the envelope against her chest. A black sedan idled at the alley's mouth. As Maya approached, the passenger door swung open. "Get in!" The voice was female, urgent but not threatening. Maya hesitated for a split second, then heard Morrison's heavy footsteps clanging down the fire escape behind her. She dove into the car. The driver was a woman in her 50s, with silver hair and intelligent brown eyes. She gunned the engine before Maya had fully closed the door. "Who are you?" Maya gasped. The woman checked her mirrors, taking a hard right onto a busy street. "Someone who's been looking for that evidence for 35 years. My name is Helen Chen." She glanced at Maya. "Sarah was my daughter." The gas station bathroom mirror reflected a face Maya barely recognized. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her skin had taken on a grayish pallor that made her look haunted. She splashed cold water on her cheeks, watching pink droplets swirl down the rust-stained drain. The baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if sensing her anxiety. 3 days had passed since she'd made the call to Vincent Romano's grandson. 3 days of jumping at every shadow, of sleeping in different motels each night, of constantly checking her rearview mirror. The weight of the photographs in her backpack felt heavier with each passing hour. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. "Hello? Maya Chen?" The voice was younger than she'd expected, with traces of the same Brooklyn accent she'd heard in Vincent's confession tape. "Yes, Michael Romano. You said you had something that belonged to my grandfather." Maya's heart hammered against her chest. "I do. Meet me tonight. Pier 47, Warehouse District. 10 o'clock. Come alone and bring everything you found." The line went dead before she could respond. Maya stared at the phone, wondering if she'd just signed her own death warrant. But what choice did she have? The money from pawning items from the storage unit was nearly gone, and she couldn't keep running forever. As evening approached, Maya drove through the warehouse district, her headlights cutting through the industrial darkness. The area was deserted except for scattered homeless camps and the occasional security patrol. Pier 47 loomed ahead, a massive concrete structure jutting into the black water. She parked near a loading dock and checked her phone. 5 minutes early, the backpack containing Vincent's confession, the photographs, and the safety deposit box key sat heavy in her lap. She'd made copies of everything and hidden them in 3 different locations, along with detailed instructions to be opened if anything happened to her. It was a precaution that felt both paranoid and essential. A figure emerged from the shadows near the warehouse entrance. Tall, lean, wearing a dark coat that flapped in the harbor breeze. As he approached, Maya could see the family resemblance, the same sharp features she'd studied in the old photographs, the same intense dark eyes. She rolled down her window as he reached her car. "You're braver than I expected," Michael Romano said, studying her face. "Or more desperate, maybe both." Maya kept her hands visible on the steering wheel. "Are you here to kill me?" A bitter laugh escaped him. "If I wanted you dead, you would be. Get out. We need to talk." Against every instinct screaming at her to drive away, Maya climbed out of the car. The harbor wind cut through her jacket, carrying the scent of salt and decay. Michael Romano was older than his voice had suggested, maybe 40, with graying temples and tired eyes. "Show me what you found." Maya hesitated, then unzipped the backpack. She handed him the confession tape first, watching his face as he examined it. His expression remained carefully neutral. "My grandfather died when I was 12, he said finally. "Lung cancer. He spent his last weeks trying to make amends for his life. I thought he'd told me all his secrets. There's more." Maya showed him the photographs, the bank records, the key, a safety deposit box in the Cayman Islands, account numbers, evidence of murders, including Elizabeth Hartley. Michael's voice was flat. "I know who she was." "Then you know what this is worth." "Do you?" He looked up from the photographs, his gaze sharp. "Do you understand what you're holding? This isn't just evidence of my grandfather's crimes. These records implicate people who are still alive, still powerful, judges, politicians, business leaders, people who've built empires on blood money." Maya felt the baby kick again, harder this time. I need the money in that account. My child will be an orphan if you're not careful." Michael's voice was harsh but not unkind. "You think this is about money? You're carrying enough evidence to topple governments. The Hartley murder was just the beginning. My grandfather laundered money for half the crime families on the East Coast, plus a dozen legitimate businesses that weren't so legitimate." The weight of his words settled over her like a shroud. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you can't just walk into that bank and withdraw the money. The moment you try to access that account, you'll trigger alarms that reach very dangerous people, people who've killed for less than what you're holding." Maya felt the pier spinning around her. "Then what do you want?" Michael was quiet for a long moment, studying the photographs in the harbor lights. "I want to finish what my grandfather started. He spent his dying days trying to figure out how to make this right, how to get this evidence to someone who could use it properly. You might be the answer he was looking for." "I don't understand. My grandfather wasn't just a criminal, Maya. In his last years, he was also an FBI informant." The warehouse felt different at night, its skeletal frame casting twisted shadows under the security lights. Sarah crouched behind a dumpster, watching the entrance while Marcus checked his watch for the third time in 5 minutes. Her heart hammered against her ribs, each beat reminding her of the baby growing inside her and everything she stood to lose. "Are you sure about this?" Marcus whispered, his breath visible in the cold air. Sarah clutched the manila envelope containing copies of everything they'd found. The originals were safely hidden in 3 different locations, along with detailed instructions for Detective Chen if anything happened to them. "We don't have a choice. Vincent knows we have the evidence, and he's not going to stop coming after us." The plan was simple in theory: get inside the warehouse, plant the listening device Marcus had procured from his journalist contacts, and gather enough recorded evidence to prove Vincent's involvement in both the original murders and the recent attempts on their lives. In practice, Sarah's hands shook as she watched the security guard make his rounds. There, Marcus pointed as the guard disappeared around the far corner. "We've got maybe 15 minutes before he comes back this way." They moved quickly across the open ground, Sarah's pregnancy making her feel clumsy and exposed. The side door Marcus had scouted earlier was secured with a chain, but bolt cutters made quick work of the rusted metal. The sound of snapping links echoed too loudly in the quiet night. Inside, the warehouse stretched into darkness, filled with towers of boxes and shipping containers. Sarah pulled out her phone's flashlight, keeping the beam low as they navigated toward the office area Marcus had identified from building plans at the city planning department. "Vincent's been using this place for decades," Marcus whispered as they climbed a metal staircase to the second-floor offices. According to the property records, it's owned by a shell company that traces back to his family's business empire. The office door was locked, but Marcus surprised Sarah by producing a set of lockpicks. "Investigative journalism teaches you interesting skills," he explained, working the tumblers with practiced ease. The lock clicked open, and they slipped inside. Vincent's private office was spartanly furnished but expensive. Leather chairs, mahogany desk, abstract paintings that probably cost more than Sarah's yearly income. Marcus immediately went to work, placing the tiny recording device under the desk while Sarah searched for anything that might provide additional evidence. The desk drawers were locked, but Sarah found something interesting on the bookshelf, a series of leather-bound ledgers dating back 30 years. She photographed several pages with her phone, noting entries that seemed to correspond with dates from Eddie Martinez's journal, numbers that could represent payments, shipments, or worse. "Got it," Marcus whispered, straightening from under the desk. "Now we just need to—" The sound of footsteps on the metal staircase froze them both. Heavy, purposeful steps that definitely weren't the security guard's routine patrol. Sarah's blood turned to ice as she recognized the measured cadence. Vincent Caldwell climbed those stairs with the confidence of a man who owned everything around him. Marcus grabbed Sarah's arm, pulling her toward a door she'd assumed was a closet. It opened to reveal a narrow supply room with another exit leading to a back stairwell. They slipped inside just as voices filled the main office. "Told you to handle this quietly." Vincent's voice carried the cold authority Sarah remembered from their confrontation. "Instead, I have a pregnant woman and a journalist running around the city with evidence that could destroy everything I've built." "They won't get far," another voice replied. Sarah recognized it as belonging to the man who'd attacked her at the storage facility. "We've got people watching the airports, bus stations, even the hospitals. When she goes into labor, we'll be waiting," Vincent finished. "But I want this resolved before then. Find them, find the evidence, and make sure they can't cause any more problems." Sarah pressed her hand to her mouth to stifle a gasp. They weren't just hunting her. They were planning to use her pregnancy against her, knowing she'd eventually have to seek medical care. Marcus found her hand in the darkness, squeezing reassuringly as the conversation continued. They learned Vincent had connections in the police department, that he'd been monitoring their communications with Detective Chen, and most chillingly, that Eddie Martinez hadn't been his first victim, just his sloppiest. "The Martinez problem should have stayed buried with that journal," Vincent said. 30 years of careful work, and it comes undone because some desperate woman bought the wrong storage unit. What about the storage facility owner? Thompson's been asking questions since the break-in. Mr. Thompson has served his purpose. Sometimes loose ends need to be tied off. The casual way Vincent discussed murder made Sarah's stomach churn. This wasn't just about covering up past crimes. He was actively planning new ones. The recording device Marcus had planted was capturing everything, but they needed to survive long enough to use it. The office door slammed, and footsteps retreated down the stairs. Sarah counted to 100 before she dared to breathe normally again. The warehouse felt like a tomb in the pre-dawn darkness. Maya pressed herself against the cold metal wall, her heart hammering so hard she was certain it would give her away. The baby kicked restlessly, as if sensing the danger that surrounded them both. Footsteps echoed through the corridor between storage units, deliberate and unhurried. Victor's men were methodical, checking each unit systematically. She'd managed to slip away from the main entrance when they'd arrived, but the warehouse only had 2 exits, and she could hear voices near the back door now. The manila envelope crinkled slightly as she adjusted her grip. Inside were photocopies of everything, the photographs, the transaction records, the correspondence that detailed Victor Henley's elaborate money laundering scheme through his construction company. The original documents were hidden in 3 separate locations around the city, insurance against exactly this moment. "Mrs. Chen?" Victor's voice carried through the darkness, cultured and calm. "I know you're here. Your car is outside, and frankly, there aren't many places to run." Maya closed her eyes, thinking fast. The storage unit behind her was secured with a simple padlock. She'd learned to pick locks during a brief rebellious phase in high school, a skill she'd never imagined would become a matter of survival. Her fingers found the bobby pin she'd bent earlier. "I have a proposition for you," Victor continued, his footsteps growing closer. "You return what belongs to me, and I'll make you a very wealthy woman. Wealthy enough that you'll never have to worry about hospital bills or keeping a roof over that baby's head." The lock clicked open. Maya eased the metal door up just enough to slip inside, then pulled it down behind her. The unit was packed with furniture covered in dusty sheets. She navigated carefully through the maze of shapes, looking for somewhere to hide. "The alternative," Victor's voice was directly outside now, "is considerably less pleasant. You see, Mrs. Chen, you've stumbled into something much larger than a simple storage unit auction. Those documents you found detail more than just creative accounting. They connect to some very dangerous people who don't appreciate loose ends." Maya found a gap between a wardrobe and a stack of boxes. She squeezed into the space, her pregnant belly making it a tight fit. Through the thin metal walls, she could hear the systematic sounds of other units being opened and searched. Her phone buzzed with a text message. The screen's glow seemed blinding in the darkness, and she quickly dimmed it. "Detective Morrison, Units 247 and 251 clear, working toward your location." Stay hidden. Relief flooded through her. Morrison had kept his word. The police were here, moving through the warehouse from the opposite end, but she realized with growing dread that Victor's men might reach her first. A loud crash echoed from somewhere in the warehouse, followed by shouting. The systematic search outside her unit suddenly became frantic movement. "Sir, we have company," someone called out. "Police, drop your weapons." Maya heard the distinctive sound of Victor swearing, his cultured facade cracking. "Find her," he hissed to his men. "Find her now." The metal door of her hiding spot began to rattle upward. Maya pressed herself deeper into the shadows, but she knew it was useless. Light from a flashlight swept across the sheet-covered furniture, probing every corner. "There you are." The voice wasn't Victor's. One of his men stood silhouetted in the doorway, gun drawn. Maya clutched the envelope tighter, her mind racing. Even if the police were in the building, they might not reach her in time. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm pregnant." The man's expression didn't change. Should have thought of that before you started poking around in things that don't concern you. A gunshot rang out, echoing through the metal structure. Maya screamed and threw herself sideways, expecting searing pain. Instead, the man in the doorway crumpled to the ground. Detective Morrison appeared behind him, gun still drawn. "Maya, are you hurt?" She shook her head, unable to speak. Morrison helped her to her feet, his eyes scanning the area for additional threats. "Victor?" she managed to ask. "In custody. We got him trying to slip out the back." Morrison's radio crackled with updates from other officers. "It's over, Maya. You're safe." But as they made their way toward the warehouse exit, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. Victor had mentioned dangerous people, connections that went beyond what she'd found in that storage unit. The documents she carried might have solved one mystery, but she suspected they'd opened the door to something much larger. The morning sun was beginning to rise as they stepped outside, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Maya placed a protective hand over her belly, feeling the baby move. They'd survived the night, but she knew their story was far from finished. The abandoned warehouse loomed against the storm clouds, its broken windows staring down at Maya like hollow eyes. She clutched the steering wheel tighter, her knuckles white as she studied the building through the rain-streaked windshield. This was it, the address from the documents, the place where everything had started 30 years ago. Detective Rodriguez had insisted on coming with her, but Maya had refused. Some things had to be done alone, and she couldn't risk his career along with everything else. Besides, if Vincent Corelli was already here waiting, she didn't want anyone else caught in the crossfire. The baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if sensing her fear. Maya pressed her hand to her belly, whispering a silent promise that she would get them both out of this alive. The USB drive felt heavy in her pocket, her only insurance policy in a game where the stakes kept climbing. She stepped out into the rain, pulling her hood up as she approached the warehouse's side entrance. The door hung partially open, creaking in the wind. Maya's heart hammered as she slipped inside, her phone's flashlight cutting through the darkness. The air smelled of rust and decay, punctuated by the steady drip of water from the leaking roof. Cardboard boxes lined the walls, their labels faded beyond recognition. Maya moved deeper into the space, following a narrow path between towering shelves. "I was wondering when you'd show up." Maya spun around, her light catching Vincent Corelli as he emerged from the shadows. He looked older than in the photographs she'd seen, his silver hair gleaming despite the dim light. But his eyes were sharp as ever, calculating. "Mr. Corelli." Maya kept her voice steady, though every instinct screamed at her to run. "I think we need to talk." He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Indeed we do. You've been quite busy, haven't you? Turning over rocks that were meant to stay buried. Your business partner Marcus Torres had interesting record-keeping habits." Maya slowly reached into her pocket, pulling out the USB drive. Very detailed records. Corelli's expression darkened. Marcus always was too cautious for his own good. "I told him to destroy everything, but he insisted on keeping insurance policies. Look how well that worked out for him. You killed him. I defended my interests, just like I'm prepared to do now. Corelli took a step closer, and Maya noticed the slight bulge under his jacket. The question is, how reasonable are you willing to be? Maya backed away, her mind racing. Reasonable enough to make you a deal. I have copies of everything stored in multiple locations. If anything happens to me, they all get released to the authorities. Clever girl. Corelli's eyes glittered with something like admiration. But I'm afraid your leverage isn't as strong as you think. From behind, Maya came the sound of footsteps. She turned to see two men approaching from the rear of the warehouse, cutting off her escape route. Her stomach dropped as she realized she'd walked straight into a trap. You see, Corelli continued, we've been monitoring your communications. We know exactly where those files are stored, and my associates are taking care of them as we speak, along with that helpful detective friend of yours. Maya's blood turned to ice. Rodriguez? Don't worry. If you cooperate, he'll live. You both will. I'm not unreasonable. Corelli extended his hand. The drive, please. Maya clutched the USB tighter, her mind frantically searching for options. The warehouse stretched around them like a maze, but the exits were blocked. Her phone had no signal in here. She was completely alone. Except she wasn't. The baby kicked again, stronger this time, and Maya felt a surge of fierce protectiveness that overwhelmed her fear. She had fought too hard and come too far to give up now. You're right, she said, holding out the drive. I should be reasonable. Corelli smiled triumphantly as he reached for it. At the last second, Maya jerked her hand back and hurled the USB drive as hard as she could toward the far end of the warehouse. It disappeared into the shadows with a faint clatter. Find it! Corelli barked at his men, but Maya was already moving. She dove behind a stack of boxes just as gunfire erupted behind her, wood splinters exploding around her head. She crawled frantically through the narrow spaces between the storage stacks, her pregnant belly making it difficult to maneuver. Behind her, she could hear the men shouting, their footsteps thundering as they searched for her. Maya reached the far wall and pressed herself against it, trying to control her ragged breathing. Through a gap in the boxes, she could see one of Corelli's men methodically searching the area where the drive had landed. His back was to her, his attention focused on the floor. She had maybe minutes before they found her hiding spot. The real USB drive, not the decoy she'd thrown, was still in her other pocket, but it would be useless if she was dead. Maya closed her eyes and tried to think. There had to be a way out of this. The abandoned warehouse felt like a tomb, its broken windows letting in slivers of moonlight that carved geometric shadows across the concrete floor. Maya pressed herself against a rusted shipping container, her heart hammering so hard she was certain it would give away her position. The baby kicked restlessly as if sensing her terror. Footsteps echoed through the cavernous space, measured, deliberate, getting closer. She clutched the manila envelope containing the photographs and bank records that had already cost 3 people their lives. The evidence that proved Senator Harrison had been laundering money through fake construction contracts for over 2 decades, skimming millions while his constituents struggled. I know you're here, Maya. Harrison's voice carried across the warehouse, calm and almost paternal. There's no point in hiding. My men have every exit covered. She bit her lip to keep from whimpering. Through a gap in the container, she could see his silhouette moving between the industrial debris. He wasn't alone. 2 figures flanked him, their weapons gleaming in the dim light. You've caused quite a stir, you know, he continued conversationally. First, Detective Morrison starts asking questions about old missing persons cases. Then that storage unit owner dies in what the police are calling a robbery gone wrong. And now Marcus, poor Marcus. His car accident was truly tragic. Maya's stomach lurched. Marcus had been helping her piece together the connections between the evidence and Harrison's current political campaign. His death 3 hours ago hadn't been an accident. It had been a warning. But here's what I don't understand, Harrison said, his footsteps stopping. What exactly did you think would happen? That you could waltz into the FBI with a box of old photographs and bring down a sitting senator? The truth was, Maya hadn't thought that far ahead. When she'd first discovered the storage unit's contents, documentation of Harrison's involvement with the Castellano crime family, evidence of contract murders disguised as accidents, bank records showing millions flowing through shell companies, her only thought had been survival. The money she could get for staying quiet would solve everything. Food, rent, medical bills, a future for her unborn child. She'd been naive enough to think she could control the situation. The beautiful irony, Harrison's voice grew closer, is that you're carrying new life while surrounded by so much death. Patricia Chen in Unit 47, a thought she could blackmail me too. 23 years ago, she learned what happens to people who overestimate their leverage. Maya's blood ran cold. Patricia Chen, the name on the storage unit rental agreement. The woman whose photographs had started this nightmare was the skeleton Maya had found wrapped in plastic sheeting behind the file boxes. A hand grabbed her shoulder, spinning her around. One of Harrison's men had circled behind, while the senator kept her distracted with his monologue. The gun pressed against her temple felt ice cold. "Found her, sir." Harrison emerged from the shadows, his silver hair perfectly styled, despite the late hour, his expensive suit unmarred by the warehouse's grime. He looked like what he was, a politician who'd spent decades perfecting the art of appearing trustworthy while orchestrating horrors. "Give me the envelope, Maya." Her fingers tightened around it. "There are copies. People know where I am." "No, there aren't, and no, they don't." His smile was genuinely warm, which made it infinitely more terrifying. Marcus was very forthcoming before his accident. "You've been working alone, telling yourself you're protecting people by keeping them uninformed. Quite noble, actually." The gun pressed harder against her skull. Maya's vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall. "The baby will be raised by loving adoptive parents who ask no uncomfortable questions about their benefactor," Harrison said gently. "I'm not a monster, Maya. I don't kill pregnant women, but I am pragmatic about problem solving." Her mind raced through possibilities, escape routes, anything that might give her an advantage. The warehouse was a maze of abandoned equipment and storage containers. If she could create a distraction, run deeper into the maze. However, Harrison continued, cooperation would be preferable for everyone involved. Give me all copies of the evidence, sign a non-disclosure agreement, and accept a very generous relocation package. You disappear, your child grows up wealthy and safe, and everyone wins. Except the families of the people you've killed. "The families of people who made poor choices," he corrected. Patricia chose greed over wisdom. Morrison chose investigation over discretion. Marcus chose friendship over self-preservation. You still have a choice to make. Aya felt the baby shift inside her, a tiny foot pressing against her ribs. This child deserved better than a world where monsters like Harrison operated with impunity. But this child also deserved to be born. The envelope crackled as her grip loosened slightly. Harrison noticed immediately. "Wise girl, hand it over, and we can all—" The warehouse lights suddenly blazed to life, flooding the space with harsh fluorescent brightness. Voices shouted from multiple directions. "FBI, drop your weapons." Maya had lied about the copies, but she'd told the truth about people knowing where she was. The abandoned warehouse stretched before Maya like a concrete maw, its broken windows staring down at her with hollow menace. Her hands trembled as she clutched the manila envelope containing the photographs and documents that could either free her or seal her fate. The baby kicked restlessly, as if sensing her fear. She'd chosen this location carefully, neutral ground, public enough that Detective Harris wouldn't try anything drastic, isolated enough that their conversation wouldn't be overheard. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows between the rusted shipping containers scattered around the property, creating a maze of hiding spots that made her skin crawl. Maya checked her phone, 3:58. Harris would arrive any moment. The sound of tires on gravel made her freeze. A black sedan pulled up 30 yards away, and Detective Harris emerged, his movements cautious and deliberate. He wore the same rumpled suit from their first meeting, but now she could see the predator beneath the weary cop facade. "Miss Chen," he called out, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. "I have to admit I didn't expect you to reach out so soon." Maya stepped out from behind a shipping container, keeping her distance. "I found something you'll want to see." Harris moved closer, and she noticed his hand resting casually near his service weapon. "Oh? And what might that be?" "Pictures," Maya said, her voice steadier than she felt. "From the Blackwood mansion. Very interesting pictures." His expression didn't change, but she caught the slight tightening around his eyes. "I'm listening." Senator Eleanor Blackwood, Judge Timothy Morrison, a very young girl who shouldn't have been there. Maya pulled out one of the photographs, holding it where he could see. Someone was documenting everything that night. Harris stopped walking. In the fading light, his face looked carved from stone. "Where did you get that?" "The same place I found the witness statements you buried. The same place I found the evidence reports you falsified." Maya's heart hammered against her ribs, but she forced herself to continue. 23 years you've been covering this up. 23 years you've been protecting murderers. "You don't understand what you're dealing with," Harris said, his voice low and dangerous. "Some secrets are buried for good reason. Because they're worth millions in blackmail money?" Harris laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Blackmail? You think this is about money?" He took another step forward. That girl was Senator Blackwood's daughter, Maya. 16 years old, trafficked to that party by people who thought they owned the world. When she tried to escape, when she threatened to expose everything, they killed her. Maya's breath caught. The baby in the photos, the one she'd assumed was just another victim, Eleanor Blackwood's own child. "I was a rookie detective," Harris continued, his voice taking on a confessional tone. "Fresh out of the academy, thought I could change the world. When I found that evidence, when I tried to build a case, they made it very clear what would happen if I didn't back down. So you destroyed everything. I saved what I could, hid it away, told myself someday I'd find a way to use it. But there is no way, Maya. These people don't just have money. They have power, real power, the kind that makes witnesses disappear and evidence vanish." Maya felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. "Is that a threat?" "It's a warning." Harris was close enough now that she could see the exhaustion etched into his features. "Give me the evidence, all of it, and walk away. Take your husband and disappear. I'll make sure you have enough money to start over somewhere safe. And if I don't—" Harris's hand moved fractionally closer to his weapon. "Then you'll end up like everyone else who tried to expose this. Your husband's already had one accident, hasn't he?" The words hit Maya like a physical blow. That wasn't random, was it? The hit and run, a reminder of how vulnerable you are. Next time, it won't be a warning." Maya's mind raced. She thought of David lying in that hospital bed, of the baby growing inside her, of the life they'd planned together crumbling around them. But she also thought of that 16-year-old girl, of all the other victims who'd never received justice. "I want immunity," she said suddenly. "Full immunity, in writing, for me and my husband, and I want protection." Harris shook his head. "You're not hearing me. There is no protection from these people. There's only silence." "Then I guess we have a problem." Maya pulled out her phone, her thumb hovering over the screen. "Because I've already uploaded copies of everything to a secure server. If anything happens to me, to my husband, to anyone I care about, it all goes public. Every photograph, every document, every dirty secret." Harris's face darkened. "You're making a mistake, Maya. A fatal one, maybe. But it's my mistake to make." The detective's hand finally closed around his weapon, and Maya realized she might have pushed too far. The warehouse felt like a tomb as Maya crept through the shadows, her heart hammering against her ribs. Every footstep echoed, despite her efforts to move silently. The baby shifted restlessly inside her, as if sensing the danger that surrounded them both. She clutched the manila envelope containing the photographs and documents, the evidence that could bring down Senator Richardson and expose the cover-up that had destroyed so many lives. But first, she had to survive the next hour. The text message had been simple: Warehouse 47, Pier Street. Come alone. Bring everything. You have 30 minutes. Maya knew it was a trap, but she also knew she was out of options. Richardson's people had found her apartment, her car, even the motel where she'd tried to hide. Detective Torres was nowhere to be found, and she couldn't shake the feeling that someone inside the police department was feeding information to Richardson. A sound made her freeze, footsteps on the metal stairs leading to the warehouse's upper level. She pressed herself against a stack of shipping containers, trying to control her ragged breathing. The baby kicked hard, making her gasp. "I know you're here, Maya." Richardson's voice carried through the cavernous space, calm and controlled. "There's no point in hiding, we need to talk." She peered around the container and saw him descending the stairs, flanked by two men in dark suits. One of them she recognized as Vincent, the man who'd been hunting her since she first opened that storage unit. The other was younger, with cold eyes that swept the warehouse methodically. "You've caused quite a lot of trouble," Richardson continued, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. "But it's not too late to fix this. We can make a deal." Maya's hand moved protectively to her belly. She thought about the photographs hidden in the envelope, images of Richardson as a young man standing next to known crime figures, documents showing payments, cover-ups, and a web of corruption that stretched back 30 years. The murder of that private investigator had been just the beginning. "What kind of deal?" she called out, her voice stronger than she felt. Richardson smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. "Smart girl. You stay hidden, destroy those documents, and I make sure you and your baby disappear safely. New identities, enough money to start over anywhere you want. All you have to do is forget what you found in that storage unit. And if I say no?" The smile vanished. "Then you'll end up like that investigator, and your baby will never have a chance to take its first breath." Maya's blood ran cold. She shifted her position, trying to get a better view of the warehouse layout. There had to be another way out, a back door, a loading dock, something. The main entrance where she'd come in was blocked by Richardson's men. "You have 1 minute to decide," Richardson said, checking his watch. "After that, Vincent and his associate will start looking for you, and they won't be interested in making deals." She saw Vincent draw a gun, the metal gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. Her mind raced through possibilities. The envelope in her hands felt both like salvation and a death sentence. Even if she gave it to Richardson, what guarantee did she have that he'd keep his word? Men like him didn't get to where they were by honoring agreements with people who could destroy them. A new sound cut through the tension, sirens in the distance getting closer. Richardson's head snapped toward the warehouse entrance, his composure cracking for the first time. "Sir," the younger man said urgently, "we need to go, now." But Richardson shook his head. "Not without those documents." "Find her." The men spread out, moving systematically through the warehouse. Maya clutched the envelope tighter and started moving, staying low and using the containers for cover. The sirens were getting louder. Had Torres finally gotten her message, or was this another trap? She rounded a corner and came face to face with Vincent. His gun was already raised, pointed directly at her chest. "End of the line," he said quietly. Maya's hand moved to her jacket pocket, where she'd hidden the small recording device Torres had given her days ago. She'd been recording everything since she entered the warehouse. Richardson's threats, his admission of guilt, everything. Even if she didn't make it out alive, maybe the truth would survive. "You don't have to do this," she said, backing away slowly. "He's going down either way. Don't make yourself an accessory to murdering a pregnant woman." Vincent's expression didn't change, but she saw something flicker in his eyes, doubt, maybe, or the last remnant of conscience. The warehouse doors burst open with a crash that echoed like thunder. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness as voices shouted, "Police! Nobody move!" Vincent's moment of hesitation cost him. Maya dove behind another container as gunfire erupted throughout the warehouse. The baby kicked frantically as she pressed herself against the cold concrete floor, praying that help had finally arrived and that it wasn't too late. The courthouse steps felt like ice beneath Maya's feet as she clutched a manila envelope containing 30 years of evidence. Her breath formed small clouds in the December air, and she could feel the baby stirring restlessly, as if sensing the weight of this moment. Detective Rodriguez stood beside her, his hand resting protectively on her shoulder. "You sure you're ready for this?" he asked, his voice gentle but concerned. Maya nodded, though her hands trembled slightly. "I've been ready since the moment I found that storage unit." The doors opened, and they walked into the familiar marble hallway where her fate had been decided so many times before. But today felt different. Today she wasn't the desperate woman facing eviction and bankruptcy. Today she was the key to unlocking justice that had been buried for 3 decades. Vincent Kellerman sat at the defendant's table, his expensive suit unable to mask the defeat etched into his features. The man who had once commanded boardrooms and bent city officials to his will now looked diminished, aged beyond his 72 years. When his eyes met Maya's across the courtroom, she saw something she hadn't expected: relief. "Your Honor," the prosecutor began, "we're here today because of the courage of one woman who refused to let sleeping secrets lie. Maya Chen discovered evidence in storage unit 247 that proves Vincent Kellerman orchestrated the murder of environmental activist Sarah Morrison in 1993, along with the systematic cover-up that followed. Maya's attorney had worked tirelessly to ensure her immunity in exchange for her testimony. The photographs, documents, and recorded conversations she'd found painted a clear picture of corporate conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of city government. Sarah Morrison had been close to exposing illegal dumping that was poisoning the water supply in 3 neighborhoods. Her death had silenced that investigation for 30 years. As Maya took the stand, her hand instinctively moved to her rounded belly. 7 months along now, healthy and strong. The stress of the past few months had been overwhelming, but knowing that Sarah's family would finally have answers made every sleepless night worth it. "Mrs. Chen," the prosecutor said gently, "please tell the court about the night you discovered the evidence." Maya's voice was steady as she recounted that fateful evening in the storage unit. She described the hidden safe, the photographs of Sarah Morrison's body before it was moved to make the death look accidental, and the payments made to silence witnesses. The courtroom was silent except for her voice and the quiet sobbing of Sarah's sister in the gallery. "And what convinced you to come forward, knowing the danger it might place you in?" Maya looked directly at Kellerman. "I thought about my baby, about the kind of world I was bringing her into. I realized I couldn't stay silent about the truth, not when someone's daughter had been murdered and forgotten. Sarah Morrison deserved justice, and her family deserved to know what really happened." The defense's cross-examination was brutal but ineffective. Kellerman's lawyer tried to paint Maya as a desperate woman seeking attention and money, but the evidence was too overwhelming, too meticulously documented. Every photograph had corresponding financial records. Every payment had a paper trail. Jerry Morrison, who had kept these secrets in his storage unit all these years, had been thorough. When Kellerman's former security chief Daniel Torres took the stand, the case was sealed. Facing his own charges, Torres corroborated every detail Maya had uncovered. He described how they'd made Sarah's murder look like an accident, how they'd paid off the investigating officers, how they'd systematically destroyed evidence for 3 decades. "I've lived with this for 30 years, Torres said, his voice breaking. "That girl didn't deserve what we did to her. None of this was worth it." The judge called for a recess before sentencing. Maya stepped outside into the crisp afternoon air, finally allowing herself to breathe. Detective Rodriguez joined her on the courthouse steps. "The DA's office confirmed your reward," he said with a smile. $2 million for information leading to the conviction of Sarah Morrison's killer. Looks like your storage unit gamble paid off after all." Maya laughed, a sound that held both joy and exhaustion. It was never about the money, though I won't pretend it won't change everything for us. She patted her belly. She'll grow up knowing her mother did the right thing. When they returned to the courtroom for sentencing, Kellerman stood to address the court. His voice was barely above a whisper. I've spent 30 years thinking I buried my crimes with Sarah Morrison. But Maya Chen proved that the truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deep you try to bury it. I'm 72 years old, and I'll die in prison. That's justice. The judge sentenced Kellerman to life without parole. As the bailiff led him away, he stopped and looked back at Maya one final time. She thought she saw him mouth the words, "Thank you," but she couldn't be sure. Walking out of the courthouse for the last time, Maya felt the baby kick strongly, as if celebrating their victory. Justice had been served, secrets had been exposed, and somewhere Sarah Morrison could finally rest in peace.